We are here on campus at New York University, Abu Dhabi, where I, Mina Al-Oraibi, sit down with Dr. Mariët Westermann, Vice Chancellor of NYU Abu Dhabi, and incoming Director and CEO of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum and Foundation, to hear about her journey at NYU Abu Dhabi and her thoughts on the arts, academia, and much more.
Bye, Masalama.
Mariët, thank you so much for making time to speak to the National.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a delight, although I have to say it does feel a little sad because, of course, you are getting ready to wrap up your time permanently in Abu Dhabi, but you will be back and forth, I hope, in your new position. So we meet ahead of you completing your incredible tenure here at New York University Abu Dhabi and before moving on to Guggenheim Foundation. So I want to start, as these are your last days on campus and we meet here on campus, what's going through your mind?
Mostly I walk around with a profound sense of gratitude and thankfulness for everything that Abu Dhabi and the UAE have given me, and especially that NYU Abu Dhabi has given me as a learning community, as a new initiative that I had a hand in creating, and that then many years later I was asked to lead. It's unusual to come back to an institution after you've started it and then done a totally different job for 9 years, as I did at the Mellon Foundation. And so then to come back for a full 5 years of being the Vice Chancellor, the richness of the experiences is impossible to encapsulate as you walk around and see all these different impressions. But it is that sense of gratitude and also, I think, pride, but I hope it is a humble pride in what we have achieved together. That's really what's most on my mind right now.
Now, New York University Abu Dhabi is young, even though New York University is more established, let's say. How would you describe NYUAD today?
NYU Abu Dhabi today is a university in and of NYU and in and of Abu Dhabi and in and for the world. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. As you said, NYU is almost 200 years old. It was created in 1831. And it was created to be a university that was non-sectarian, where essentially anyone could come. And very soon women came, people from denominations that were usually not represented in universities. And it was created to help develop New York City and to prepare a professional class and an intellectual class for this growing city. And when you think about NYU Abu Dhabi today, in many ways we play that role in relation to the history of the country here. And at the same time, we have played a transformative role within NYU as an increasingly global institution. So today, NYU Abu Dhabi is a global and local institution, very much grounded in Abu Dhabi and in the history of this country. The country is now formally 52 years young. We first came here when it was 36 years. I remember the first National Day I attended, it was 36th. And so we've really, when you think about it, for these 70 years we've been here, we've really become part of the history of the country and we've grown with it. And we've done it by creating a university that mirrors NYU in New York in many ways, but in other ways is very different from it. We are here, we built a core around a liberal arts college, 2,100 students now. We started with 143 in 2010. And the students are easily as diverse as what we have at NYU itself. They come from 125 countries, but a full 22% is from the UAE. So we're very proud of that. So we've built that, and around that we've built nascent graduate programs, PhDs, masters in economics and fine arts, but that's still quite small when you compare that to NYU in New York with its, what is it, something like 40,000 students or more. No, actually I'm wrong, 50,000 students, some 8,000 faculty. Here we are sort of a miniature version of that, but more fully grounded in that liberal arts tradition, perhaps even than in New York, and with a really ambitious trajectory when it comes to professional education in particular. So we're about to launch our first professional program. The Stern School of Business will come here, partnering with us in January to launch the MBA. And around that, I am sure, we'll develop a fuller School of Business at some point. So today we are a well-established institution in and of Abu Dhabi and in and of NYU, but we're also still very much an evolving one. We're still very young.
You are young, so when you look to the future, where do you hope NYU Abu Dhabi will be when it celebrates its 200-year anniversary?
200th anniversary, let's see, what will that be? That's a great way to think. It will be 2210. 2210. I always think that it's good to think both long-term and more immediate and medium-term. And it's nice the way you asked the question, because I think when you step out of a role, you have to be able to let go and not say what your immediate successor, Fabio Piano, is going to be doing, because you should just be there to support and to cheer on, because the institution needs to, the community needs to take care of itself. But as I imagine it, in 200 years' time, we are almost exactly the same age as the country at that time. We really have grown with it. And just as NYU has become this absolute generator of intellectual energy, creative energy, particularly for New York City and the broader environment around it. NYU has become the anchor of what is now a global network institution and university. I think NYU Abu Dhabi will be one of the really strong nodes in that network, possibly as large as what's in New York itself. Just as we have Shanghai, Shanghai may grow into a bigger campus like that. So I think in 200 years, who knows what it will be, but I think this country will really have established itself, as it is so rapidly doing, as a vital node of peace, coexistence, arts, culture, creativity, and prosperity for the broad region. I think NYU Abu Dhabi will be an anchor institution of that ecosystem.
So you said it's important to let go when you move on, and you wish your successor luck, but you must have some advice.
My successor happily has succeeded me once before.
Yes, that's true.
The interim vice chancellor is Fabio Piano, a fabulous genomics scientist who has created the Center for Genomics and Systems Biology in New York and its counterpart here, which are very strong research and teaching entities. But he first came to NYU Abu Dhabi when I left the first time, and I had been the first provost of the university, and together with then the president and the vice chancellor, we decided that he would be the right person to come into it. And so he did that for 10 years. He returned to research and teaching 4 years ago when I brought the next provost. And I'm just thrilled that he will seamlessly step in, because he really knows the environment so well. So he and I have talked a lot, and we've talked, of course, with our provost and our leadership team. We've had 6 months to do this, which is really great, actually. You don't often have such a long transition. And I think he is quite focused rightly on solidifying what is now really our steady state undergraduate college. We grew it from 1,300 students when I came back to more than 2,000 today, which is roughly the steady state number. He will keep strengthening that further, but it's really in extremely good shape. And he will make sure that that professional program, the Stern School of Business, really will be our great partner here. So Stern at NYUAD is much on his mind, and how we can build around that further professional programs that support the ambitious workforce development and leadership development goals of the country. I think that's important. And then he has always been a great leader for research at the university. He brought his own research chops, obviously. I had brought it maybe in the humanities in particular, in social science, and he particularly in science, so he will build that out further. And I think we're already growing our global PhD fellowship program, which has grown from about 80 to 115 today. And I think building eventually our own graduate programs. We've laid a lot of groundwork for that, for the PhDs. How to do that best in relation to research is a big and interesting question for the country and for NYU Abu Dhabi, so I know he's very focused on that. And then we also have now, 15 years in, we began developing things 2009, say. We have really strong research. We have more than 80 research labs and centers, often in collaboration with New York or Shanghai. And these are in all the disciplines, and I think we're now at a stage where you can see research translation. We already have many patents, but how do you translate that into commercialization and sort of creative endeavors? And again, I think Fabio is absolutely the right person to step in and help us lead that forward.
What do you wish you knew? What do you know now that you wish you knew when you first took on this particular assignment as Vice Chancellor, rather than when you first came to Abu Dhabi?
I wish I'd done that second master's in public health and epidemiology.
Yeah, right.
I became an epidemiologist like everybody else
right.
during COVID, but having known a little bit more about how to manage those situations would have benefited anybody. But setting that aside, that's of course a topical situation that we had. I think that what I didn't quite realize at the time that I came back is just how rapidly generative AI would take off. And knowing a little bit more about that, I had been really concentrated on the humanities and the arts, coming back in, working for the Mellon Foundation. So that has been a crash course experience, I think, for the world and also for me. And of course, because I'm a learner and I believe that universities are learning communities where everybody is a learner, no matter how old, how young, where they are in their journey, or what their role is in the university. So we've worked hard on it. I would have liked to have been a little bit ahead of OpenAI. Actually, ChatGPT was not a surprise when it came. It just was a surprise to most of us in university. So I think having made a little bit more progress on that would have been great. But I think on the whole, I was lucky to come in having followed NYU Abu Dhabi so closely even after I left it. And so knowing the founding DNA of an institution is important, and knowing the community in which it sits is important. And I think both of those areas I felt very well prepared, and I've only learned more. So I don't have great regrets in what I didn't know, and I think I've learned a lot.
You mentioned COVID-19, and I remember when you had your commencement speech in 2022 and speaking about the excitement of us being together in person. And I still have that excitement. I don't know if it's the same for you. I don't take it for granted that we can now sit together like this. Was that your greatest challenge? What has been your greatest challenge here?
I think COVID-19, when I look back on it now, as I have the last few weeks, surely was the most existential challenge to all of us on the planet, and certainly to NYU Abu Dhabi and to NYU, the home institution. So yes, that was the greatest challenge, but it also was one that showed the strength of the institution. It showed the strength of our community and our connection to the society here. And I'll explain that a little bit. Of course, in March, I think it was March 8 or 9, when we got that phone call at night saying, okay, you're going to close for the next 2 weeks. Every university is going to do that. And then in 2 weeks, you all are going to come back. This is the Ministry of Education rightly responding to directives from a health perspective here. And then you're going to come back and everybody will be online, but everyone has to study from home. And I thought, and I said, and I talked with our partners who are the most wonderful partners here, and we decided, well, that's going to be really hard for our community because we are a residential campus, and really fully 97% of our students live on campus, plus we have visiting students from New York and Shanghai. And at the time, by March the 10th or so, most airports in the world were closing, most borders were closing. And we had some 80% of students from other countries. And many of them, they didn't come from great resources to begin with. So the idea that we would send everybody onto uncertain journeys into the world where they might get stuck, or come home to homes where they didn't have their own room from which to sit and learn, or where they might have in their families people who would be very susceptible or vulnerable if they were to infect their elders, for example. We realized that that was completely antithetical to the values of NYU Abu Dhabi. So we reached into the values and we said to ourselves, what should we be doing here? We'd been preparing, of course. By then we had shut down a lot of operations anyway. But we said, okay, these are the two things we need to remind everybody of. We need to remind everybody that the health of one of us is the health of all of us if we have such an incredibly virulent virus and dangerous virus. And the second is, we promise people, whether they are our professors or our researchers or our students, that we will do everything always to continue the academic mission and let them learn and reward them in a way for the fact that they put their trust in this young institution. That was a strength. So we have this very mission-driven community, and putting those two things together gave us the strength to work with the Ministry of Education and the health authorities, which were great and very collaborative, so that I could say to them, yes, we agree, everyone should study from home, but for most of our students, this campus is their home. And so we were, in the end, one of the rare universities that did not send its students home. We gave people the option to stay, and the very vast majority of students did, either because they had to or because they wanted to. And so we went online, everybody from their room, but as teachers, I was teaching at the time, I knew that my students were there. I could see them walk down to get their food in the dining hall or to pick up something at the pharmacy. We have so many resources on our campus, and so it became a strength, I think, that we had this very difficult condition. But I will say that in April and May 2020, there were many times that I would try to go to sleep at night and think, Mariët, what if you got it all wrong? What if you're the first campus where you have massive outbreaks? And what if people really get hurt and become very ill or worse? And we were very lucky that that didn't happen, but we didn't know. I think in the end, when I look back on it, the greatest challenge became also an opportunity to strengthen our systems, to work together better, to become what had been a startup institution and get into a mindset of one that is here to stay, that needs to work together in totally different ways, bringing faculty and staff together and students, and create a compact for the future of the institution. And in the end, I wouldn't have wished for it. There were times I thought, will I look back in 5-10 years and think that all I did was sitting here with COVID? And it's not that way today. And that's because the community was so strong. And so I benefited from that.
And you're a great leader, because when I ask you questions, you always root it in the university, in the institution, in the people, in the community. So I'm pretty sure the way you're going to answer this question is similar, but I'm going to try to push you on this. What was your personal greatest achievement here? So you, Mariët, when you look back on your time here, what was your greatest achievement?
My goal when I came back, now not thinking of the earliest days, building a new institution is easier than evolving an existing one. We all know that. And I think one of the goals I had coming back was pulling together a more diverse leadership team that the whole community would be able to recognize themselves in some ways. We had had some challenges, all universities do, because of the histories of how the academy has evolved. And as a woman, you feel that maybe a little bit more strongly sometimes than a man, although many men would agree completely with what I'm saying. So there were areas to think about in terms of women in leadership positions, academic leadership positions, a diversity of backgrounds in other ways, where especially since our students are so diverse, it's really important for them to see different people in the classroom, different people leading the institution, different kinds of people in student affairs. And there were pockets of that very strongly, but we really leaned into that question of how can we, as a leadership team, really hear what our community is saying to us, work with them in a distributed leadership mode, but also really pull together so that we are not all in our silos going fast. There's that famous proverb, that's probably a proverb that somebody invented and then said it was a proverb, which is when you want to go fast, go alone. When you want to go far, go together. And I fundamentally believe that. The thing about NYU Abu Dhabi is you also have to go fast. So doing those things together is always an interesting challenge. But I think when I look at our leadership team, both the immediate core of some 8-9 people, but then a much more extended group that we bring together every 4 to 6 weeks as well, of 40 people, I think you can really see the strength that lives in diversity. diversity is a given, not a goal. How you work with it is what you have to think about, and I think we made massive progress in that.
So you speak of leadership, important to nurture leaders. What do you look for in a leader?
Leaders have to have a sense of purpose, and that purpose should be related somehow to the job they have or the mission they join. People need to know what their jobs are, of course, but leaders need to have a sense of purpose in terms of what they can contribute to the community they lead. Most leaders don't know that they're leaders until they are. The really good ones, I think. There are some exceptions. Some people are born and they say, I want to be president of the United States, and they go for it and they become it, like Bill Clinton, maybe. But it's rare, I think. And so I look for a leader who can listen well to what a diverse community is saying to them. And those leaders also have to think of themselves as leaders for that entire community, not one segment within it. And so the sense of purpose is about keeping that community together, moving them forward towards a goal or a set of goals that the leader has to draw out and be able to articulate and push on. And then making sure that all members in that community, if you think about them as a little flotilla, say, all the boats or water vehicles need to move in the same direction. They don't have to be the same vehicles. They don't have to go exactly at the same pace. There are different ways in which a kayak moves, a motorboat moves, a sailboat, and so forth, as long as they're going towards a horizon that is understood by all. And leaders have to be able to recognize that and keep people motivated to do it. So I'm looking for that sense of purpose, an ability to articulate goals, help people get there, and then, importantly, they have to be on a sailboat because they need to be able to tack, to tack and change direction when that's really needed.
I want to ask you about some of the traditions you have here in New York University, Abu Dhabi, including your morning walks.
Yes.
So how did you come up with this idea? What did it entail, and what did you learn from them?
You just asked an interesting question about leadership, and I think listening and having opportunities to hear from all, sometimes in unstructured ways, is really important. And when you're in a job like mine, people often think of you as that comma person, Mariët Westermann, comma, the Vice Chancellor, and they think of the Vice Chancellor first, rather than the person, which is reasonable, you're the leader. But therefore, leaders often have a hard time getting access to what lives in the community because people will tell them precisely what they think you want to hear, or they're shy to approach you, or you hear only from the very loud ones or the frequent flyers who come by all the time. And so when I came back here, I said, how do I reach the student community, which was then already 1,400 students? I knew I wouldn't see all of them. I would see student government. I would see them in structured occasions with student interest groups, which are always lively, and I spent a lot of time with students. I would see them in my classes. That's very worthwhile, but I only teach one class a year. So I thought, aha, I like to walk. This is how I've always known the world, with my family, wherever I've gone, whether it's hiking or just a morning stroll. And I got to know my Abu Dhabi by walking. When I first came here in 2007, people all told me, no, you can just build a couple of towers for your campus because nobody walks in Abu Dhabi. I said, well, that's funny you're saying that because I see people walking everywhere. You're assuming that people have cars, and many people don't. So I love walking, and I also thought, our students are on this beautiful campus. We have the most gorgeous campus. It is a wonderful set of facilities on an equally beautiful island that's evolving. So we're on an island, but we're not an island. And I want to make sure students know the entire kind of character of Abu Dhabi as a city and an emirate. So we're always trying to get them out of the library. We don't need them to be in the library, but we try to get them off campus and especially off this beautiful island to get to know the city. And I thought a morning walk would be the ideal way to do it because everyone can sign up for it. And people on those walks, 20 people come, it's always the case that students there don't know each other already, even when they're seniors. And the first years come into the community that way. We bring some community members to walk. And the ground rules are simple. You can ask me absolutely anything, and I will answer it to the best of my ability, but I don't want to see any of it on X or Instagram. What happens on the walk stays on the walk. And that goes for me as well, if they tell me things that I need to hear. But I will act on them if there are good ideas.
So you found it as a feedback loop.
Yes.
I mean, in addition to the community building, that feedback
Yes.
loop. Because it comes to your point about articulation, communication, and listening. So how do you, I mean, was this a key component? What other components did you have to make sure that you were getting the right feedback loops to understand how you're growing?
For the students, this was vital because if you think you do it about 8-10 times a year, you reach 200 students. And you do that for 4 or 5 years, you really, and each of these students is also talking about it to other students. So that's valuable. And I'll give one example. In one of the first walks, a couple of the senior students said, we have such a wonderful career development center, but certain areas are just not covered. Our professors don't know about these things. We need a broader institutional strategy for placement of students in great, satisfying next steps, whether it's graduate school or a job or an entrepreneurship opportunity, is important. And out of that, we really developed a very full suite of programs that put more institutional heft behind the idea of how do we prepare now some 500 students a year that we send into the world for satisfying leadership positions. So that was a really great example. I also hold town halls. We developed that in COVID. We had town halls on Zoom with 1,000 people. And we brought together, sort of for the first time in these town halls, not only the faculty by themselves, there are always feedback loops there. You go to the faculty council, very important. Staff meetings, general staff meetings, they're their own thing. And then you have student government meetings. Bringing them all together during COVID seems like the only smart thing to do because everyone had to hear the same thing. Our bodies are our bodies. It wasn't as if we were going to have different policies for faculty, for students and for staff when it came to vaccination and so forth. So we learned from that, and I thought those feedback loops were very critical as well. I think leadership today cannot be conducted from behind a computer or a desk. Leadership and management are not the same thing. There's an overlap. And both of them I really encourage walking around or being mobile in whatever way you can be to be with the people.
So of course the internal dynamics is hugely important for any university, and particularly New York University, Abu Dhabi with its incredible diversity. I want to ask you about forward-facing, how you think the world sees New York University, Abu Dhabi, and where it's positioned today.
First, I would say something about our global academic reputation. The story of NYU as a global institution and deliberately global and local, wherever it operates, is one of the last 20 years. That really began sort of in 2002, 3, 4, when we began to see that so many students of NYU in New York wanted to study abroad. And that led eventually to having all these study away sites on 6 continents now, a full 16 of them. And included in this are these campuses that grant degrees, full NYU campuses, in Abu Dhabi and on Abu Dhabi's model, also NYU Shanghai. So we are really now a network university on which the sun never sets, literally. And along with that, we've seen this very exciting growth in research capacity, where research, as a research institution, NYU is now incomparably stronger than it was around 2000. At the time, we didn't even say where we were ranked in the world. It was somewhere north of 100. In the last few years, we have been consistently ranked around 25, even sometimes 24th in the world by Times Higher Ed, one of the most important rankings. And I think when you look at the trajectory, the opening of NYU Abu Dhabi, attracting by now 350 new top scholars and scientists in the world here. We have 3 Nobel laureates on our faculty now. This is something that NYU could hardly dream of. NYU New York also has strengthened in the same way. So I think the strength of NYU Abu Dhabi and how we are regarded internationally has a lot to do with how NYU has strengthened and how we have helped that. And at the same time, it has a lot to do with this amazing country, which has been on this trajectory where, when I first came here, people kept telling me, are you going to Abu Dhabi? It's like, no, it's Abu Dhabi. It's like, no, it's Abu Dhabi, people would say. It's like, okay, we'll change that too. And clearly the country has done a wonderful job profiling itself as a really safe and interesting place to live and to build lives and careers. And we are really very much a part of that. So both the academy is looking at us differently, but also I think the society here, because we've become such a strong anchor institution, bringing our art center activities, our great programming that's open to anyone in the society, our lectures, our art exhibitions, our executive education, our Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Scholars Program for students from other universities, our summer academy that prepares talented Emirati students and other students who grow up here for top universities, whether it is ours or others. I think we've done a lot to solidify our role as an anchor institution. Every university worth its name should be contributing to the development of its society, not just by educating students from that society, but by sharing our creative and intellectual wealth. And I think NYU Abu Dhabi is really bringing that.
It's an interesting time in academia and also a time under stress when there are increasing voices calling for universities to take more of a political role, or at least to take a position. Of course, what we see happening with the Gaza war is top of mind for many people, but it's beyond that. It's also this idea of activism, and you have it in universities, but also in cultural institutions. How do you see it? What role do you see for universities, but also cultural institutions, foundations, to speak up at certain moments when you feel the world is in need of a clear position on developments that are political in nature?
Universities are not political platforms, but they are obviously porous to the world. And if you take NYU Abu Dhabi, with students and faculty and staff from 125 countries coming into our living environment and our learning community, they bring with them all the beauties of the world and all the strife of the world. And therefore, you will have strong voices from within the university and outside sometimes, as we see in the United States and all over Europe and the region, frankly, asking for university leaders to take a position. I've thought very deeply about this over the past 5 years, in particular when I've been in the leadership role here, because I think, and then when I think about it, is that what is unique to academic institutions is that they are truth-seeking, that is their mission, knowledge-producing, and knowledge-disseminating. And to make sure that that truth-seeking happens in the most rigorous way, an open and creative way, you have to protect the rights of everyone in that community to represent themselves on a particular academic topic and to contribute to that truth-seeking, whether you're a researcher, a professor, or a student, or even a staff member. Now, to make sure that that academic space, which is sacrosanct to me, is protected, and that all, no matter where they stand on an issue, whether it's outside or inside the academy, can bring forward their views in a rigorous, academically valid way, it is actually very important for the leader of the institution not to say how everybody should be thinking. I have often been asked over the years, or told, Vice-Chancellor, you don't represent me. Or I am sometimes told, the university doesn't represent us on a particular live issue. And it's not just the issues of the last half year, it is really any issues that have come up, from climate to other things. And I always say, you know, you're right, I don't represent you. I sometimes represent you when you need a visa or something like that, then the university represents you. Or there are pictures of you, that's a representation of you acting in the community. But especially when there is a very divisive topic, where probably 90% of the people in your institution, or 80%, might agree with one position, and that's the one you're laying down the law about. What about that other 10 and 20%? How are they going to be learners in that institution, or contribute, or feel safe? So I think it is the job of academic leaders to protect the space of free academic inquiry and of teaching that's rigorous and sorts out problems in the classroom. But it is not our job to lay down the law on one political position or another, because if I did that with my people from all these different countries, and many countries' troubles are forgotten, let's remember that too, I could be the condemner-in-chief every day of the year. And I don't think I would be doing the job of protecting the sacrosanct learning space in that way.
Now, I want to shift gears because, of course, we're also forward thinking and looking at your next position. Very exciting, the Guggenheim Foundation, and really leading a foundation that is at the helm of what art becomes. And of course, as a historian of art, for you, it must be exciting to going to one of your other loves, let's say, in the world. So first, how are you thinking about this role, and what made you decide to take it?
The opportunity to lead the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum and Foundation was unexpected. I wasn't looking to do something else at all, and I would never have left NYU Abu Dhabi for another university. This is my university. NYU is my university in so many ways. I cannot imagine a more inspiring place to build a learning community and send these fantastic students into the world, produce all this knowledge. I wouldn't have done it. At the same time, I wouldn't have left for another art museum. What's so fascinating about the Guggenheim Museum and Foundation is that the foundation was created in its charter going back to the 30s. It was created to create a museum, and in fact, museums was already on the mind of the founders, Solomon Guggenheim and his chief curator, Al-Oraibi, who was also the director of the first Museum of Non-Objective Art that they created. And so what that means is that today it is a global institution, a little bit like the NYU of modern and contemporary art museums. And so I feel that I can contribute something there. And again, I wouldn't have taken the position just because it was art, although I love going back to the art because arts is what brought me into the academy in the first place. And so that is just very exciting. But the Guggenheim, you could say, is almost the only museum organization I would have considered precisely because of that global extension where you have an organization that oversees 4 museums. The one in New York, the iconic building in the iconic Frank Lloyd Wright building, the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice that's related by family and much later in the 70s came into the foundation, the Guggenheim Bilbao, which opened in 1997, and on which model, in a way, we're building the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. And if Abu Dhabi hadn't been in that future, I don't think I would have taken the job.
That's incredible. So you see Abu Dhabi as part of that anchor for the future, but also your own experiences. So tell us a little bit more about Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. What can we expect?
This is, of course, where the moment where one says in an interview, I haven't even started yet. But of course, there is a magnificent vision for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi that I followed since 2007, when the Guggenheim Foundation began to talk with the partners here that are today the Department of Culture and Tourism. It is a beautiful partnership idea where I think there was this inspiring vision here in the country to say, just as we have NYU Abu Dhabi and our own people here can enjoy having an American university here, they don't always have to go abroad, they can have the benefits of a research institution here. Similarly, the country had this vision for all sorts of experiences. The healthcare experience with Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi, and other wonderful institutions that have arisen. Sports, which have really arisen around Formula One, the NBA coming here, but building its own versions of these global amenities, making them available here. From the start, there was this inspiring vision that there should be museums here. There were museums here, after all, in Al Ain, in Dubai. Every emirate had museums. But what didn't exist was really these more global extensions of museums that are both global and local. And I think the excitement of the Louvre Abu Dhabi coming and the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi at the very same time being envisioned to offer, next to the universal approach of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, a museum for modern and contemporary art, 1960 and beyond, is very exciting. What I can say about it is that, like every Guggenheim museum, every museum with Guggenheim in its name, it's based in a collection. Mm-hmm. This is often poorly understood about contemporary art museums, modern and contemporary art museums. modern and contemporary art museums that are not just a temporary space where you show a biennial, say, or what they call a Kunsthall in Germany, Kunsthalle. They build collections because they want to preserve for the future what the history of the art of today is going to look like and make it possible to tell those stories in the future. It's often, so much art gets lost in the history of humanity through all sorts of reasons, and if you don't collect it in real time, you will not have it later. So it's really hard to collect the art of today or of a few decades ago, thinking about what's going to be most needed, impressive, diverse and interesting for people in the future. And that work I find fascinating and is in a way a lot like running a university when you think about it, because in universities you're constantly making choices about what should be taught, what should be brought back, what should be in the libraries, and what research should be promoted now. And so it's that same kind of discernment that our curators and conservators work on, and the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will fully tie into that global network, that constellation, as we call it, the Guggenheim constellation of 4 sites in New York, Venice, Bilbao, and then very soon now here. And tapping into that is really the strength of the concept. The collections here will be obviously related to the collections and their great strengths that we have in the other 3 sites, but they will be from 1960 forward to today, and today is ever evolving. And grounded in this region, there will be a strong core from West Asia, North Africa, and so forth, and extending into the global south more generally. Real diversity of art making everywhere, including indigenous arts from the many communities that are First Nations around the world, but of course also some absolutely great anchors of the history of post-war art in the United States and Europe. It will be a truly diverse and beautiful collection around which we will also have a rich program of temporary exhibitions that, again, the Guggenheim, a curatorial cohort, really across our constellation, will help curate and bring here.
It's interesting how you speak about the constellation, and when people again think of Guggenheim, they think of the collections that you have. And again, coming to Abu Dhabi is exciting because it's, I guess it's outside of Europe and the US.
Yes.
I pause always with the terminology of global north and global south, but we kind of, there's this constant questioning now of, is there enough representation that is global when it's really, not on Guggenheim, but globally when we have these conversations that it's the US and Europe, and people assume that's global and it isn't. How much do you think your experience of living here, getting to know all the people that you know from all walks of life, will feed into that in helping put together collections not only for Abu Dhabi, but the larger constellation?
When I said earlier in our conversation that I think a lot about the gifts that Abu Dhabi and the UAE have given me, that's, I think, what I hope I can bring back into the bloodstream of the constellation, the connections among the 4 sites. The Guggenheim has gone through transformation before. Going to Spain, and particularly going to the Basque Country, was in a way a quite innovative move that everybody wonders whether that was a good idea at the time. It's been transformative for the Guggenheim. We had almost 1.4 million visitors to the Guggenheim Bilbao last year in a city of 350,000 people. I think something similar is very much possible here. And when we do that, it is not just by bringing the same thing we already have. The Guggenheim constellation is united by one set of values, which is a commitment to art as being part of anybody's life, and strengthening that relationship that actually everyone already has in some way to art, and making that possible for modern and contemporary art. That is our offer. But we're going to do it differently in each of the instantiations, because of course you have very strong local traditions and flavors, and also a rich history of modern and contemporary art being created here as we speak. NYU Abu Dhabi has an MFA. I see our artists really as part of the future here, And so I think what I learned along the way from here is I got to know so much about South Asia and traveled there frequently. I never had before I moved to Abu Dhabi. The same is true for many people who come here. I became much more alert to the enormous growth potential and enormous growth, frankly, of the youth population in Africa. And what that rising middle class is asking for when it comes to education and also participation in culture, and not just in local culture, but global culture. So I really hope that these rich experiences that I've been blessed to have, this entire exposure to languages, faith communities, cultural traditions that I knew only very distantly from New York and the Netherlands, I hope that I can help our remarkable teams, which are already very diverse, as we develop these collections, and especially the community programs around them. Museums of modern contemporary art, like the Guggenheim, are still grounded in collections, but collections are nothing unless you activate around them and bring their wealth in very different ways to their communities, and also offer communities a chance to talk back to them and say what they see in them and what they would like to see. So I think I hope that my experience working in a community like NYU Abu Dhabi will also help me bring some of that thinking about learning with art and through art into our offer.
Now, of course, you spoke about modern and contemporary art, but there's also culture and art of time way further back, and we think about the importance of conservation. And of course, you are very involved in Elif. You've also worked hard to help scholars in places of conflict or under stress, which is the Scholar Rescue Fund. So tell us a bit more about how those feed into, again, the worldview that you have, but also the role of organizations, institutions to help those who are under stress.
Thank you for that question. I think that, again, when you think about your early question, what should universities do when faced with such grievous conflicts and demands around the world that are understandable but hard to answer because we're not political institutions and we don't run governments? But what we can do is, of course, support scholars and artists who need our support, and think about doing that in a way that's authentic to the kind of institution we are. So my work as chair of the Scholar Rescue Fund Selection Committee is among the most important work that I do within the Academy, even though it is of necessity extremely quiet. What we do is help scholars who are at risk around the world of persecution, or who cannot evolve their careers because they're caught in the crossfire of war through no fault of their own. From any country in the world, they can come to us, and we place them in fellowships for 2 years in a network of some 400 or more institutions from around the world, many here in the region, as a matter of fact. And when you see that you can actually help rebuild careers. And that is something you can do from within an academic institution without ever standing on a soapbox and saying, look how great I am. We're just there to help. And so we do it very quietly, because you don't want people to create more trouble for those faculty you can help, although they often some of them end up being real leaders, and they stay very involved with their countries. For example, we've helped many scholars from Ukraine over the last few years.
And you plan to continue to do that work?
I will continue to be the chair of the Scholar Rescue Fund as long as the Scholar Rescue Fund will have me. You should only do things when you can fully do them. I think that's very important. And we created an equivalent to it a few years ago when I was at the Mellon Foundation, called the Artist Protection Fund. And the Artist Protection Fund places artists particularly in research institutes for art or in museums. Artists don't always want to be in a university, so we have that equivalent, and I'm not directly involved in that anymore, but I helped create it back in the day with the Institute of International Education, which oversees both of these funds. And so I think these are good examples of what institutions can do, not what they can't do. My whole worldview is about what can I do to make a contribution towards the greater consilience of people, peaceable coexistence, living together, working together for a better future. I think that's what I like to concentrate on. And so when you think now about museums with their exhibitions, with the work they preserve and choose to preserve, the work of Aleph, the Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Zones, does amazing work by quickly getting resources to where they need to be without making grand political statements. We are neutral as we can be, to help people on the ground protect mosaics from bombing, for example, or rebuild tombs that have been desecrated by hateful acts, whatever it may be, rebuild churches, rebuild synagogues, rebuild mosques, rebuild temples. I think we need to protect culture wherever it lives, as long as it is not itself an instrument of hate and destruction.
And that takes me to the next point. You know, you've spoken before about public constituencies, so this idea of who your constituents are. So again, looking to the future, when you think about Guggenheim, who do you see as your public constituencies?
It's a wonderful question. Museums and art museums, and that's true for the Guggenheim, are in principle for everyone. We should not segment who is allowed in the door, and if people don't have resources to come into the door to buy a ticket, there are other programs to bring them in. I think the Guggenheim in New York and in the other locations, Venice and Bilbao, has a storied history of inclusion and bringing learning through art. One of our famous programs is LTA, Learning Through Art, has run for decades, and it brings art into the lives of children and learners of all sorts of abilities as well. So I think when you think about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, of course, on the one hand, Abu Dhabi has become a fabulous destination, as has Dubai, for tourism from around the world. It's a totally new story. The hospitality industry is fantastic. We want to help be a destination, just as the Louvre, Abu Dhabi has become so incredibly popular and well regarded. And at the same time, we want to be an anchor institution of Abu Dhabi, the UAE and the region, and encourage families, encourage schools, encourage students and learners wherever they are on their trajectory from pre-K through grey, as I like to say, and even beyond grey for some people. I think that would be, that's really our vision. And just as our offer will be global and local, truly diverse, showing the full range of modern contemporary art from around the world. So we will invite people from around the world, just as people from 200 countries just about live here. We want that whole diversity kind of to course through the institution. And I also like to say we also want to do it online. There are many people on Earth who will never be able to travel to a museum in New York, Bilbao, or Abu Dhabi. And so I also have begun to think about that fifth Guggenheim, the Guggenheim anywhere, anytime, that would be online. So there's a lot to come, and I would just say, watch this space.
Mariët, I want to ask you about generative AI. There are lots of conversations going on, and you referenced it earlier about what we need to know and how will it influence our lives. What's your take on it? What do you find is permissible to use when it comes to generative AI, and what should we be wary of?
When ChatGPT hit the big time in November 2022, universities were truly unprepared to deal with it. Our first reaction of many faculty was, okay, we need to be the plagiarism police. How are we going to do this? And of course, ChatGPT and other tools like that already existed started creating checkers so that you could check if it had been used in writing the answer to an essay or a problem or something like that. And when NYU Abu Dhabi faculty actually studied this and wrote a very important study on it immediately, they found out that you can fool the checker very easily, and the checker often gives a false positive and says this student has cheated. So then you go after the student and it turns out not to be true. So I quickly decided, and many people would agree with this, I think, that you cannot keep being the plagiarism police because it's the wrong question. The question is more, what does generative AI mean for the future of work and life for our students? We're preparing the whole student in our liberal arts education. The whole student for a successful life in whatever discipline they choose, professionally, but also for being a good citizen, a contributor to society. And so maybe writing an essay the traditional way is no longer the best way to test. Maybe we need to teach them different things about how to use generative AI in a responsible way, an ethically responsible way, how to be more creative, how not to have to do baseline coding, which is actually kind of soul crushing. What about developing new products and software using that baseline coding? And so some of our faculty quickly started doing very creative things and stopped having these traditional assessments. I completely changed my course on Gardens of Eden into primarily a design course, and also sort of a critical course where all the work was done in the classroom and on the field trips and in creating products together. And I think that's the way forward. I think it is asking, what do students need to know now, because the employees are all expecting it, and how can we help them do responsible work? And I feel that tide is turning in the academy.
What about when it comes to art and generating art through AI?
Artists, through time, have been truly among the most creative people on the planet. And they tend to respond well to technological innovation. Even in their own field of painting, for example, they were always kind of trying to make it yet better. How do you represent something yet more clearly or in a more stunning way? If you're a sculptor, how do you make it less taxing to sculpt marble and things like that? They've always done that. And artists have historically also been very interested in technology. And so I think art museums, art galleries, artists themselves in their studios have a great opportunity to work with these generative AI possibilities. And you see them using them left and right. There is very interesting work being produced that you already could see at COP28, for example. There were large panels here imagining kind of the future of biodiversity, created by a leading Turkish artist. And so I think we need to make that possible. An institution like the Guggenheim has always been about the art of today. Our founders collected Kandinsky, Klee, Picasso, living artists, some of whom were barely known in the United States when they started collecting them. We've always done this, and so I think here too we have, for example, at the Guggenheim, a curator of technology-enhanced art who is very talented and running around to Venice Biennale to see what's most interesting and telling me about it, which is very extremely helpful. We also have artists in residence who are fellows who work on leading edge technology and art, and I think that kind of work we also very much hope to be doing here with Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. We should be following artists and then ask questions of them. It's an interaction. It's never just the artist saying only this. This is why we have curators. The word curator has the word cura or care in it. We care about what happens with artists and their art, and we care about representing the best in leading edge art. And so I think that even for employers and for universities, it will be especially interesting to see what artists do, because they sit at this very interesting interface between this very pure creativity, if you will, and society and collectors and institutions that want to show, acquire, and interpret that art. So artists may really have an even larger role to play, given the great potentials of generative AI.
Now, if we look back to art, as you said, artists throughout their different times have played an incredible role in capturing that era and that moment. And I wanted to ask you about Rembrandt, because of course, between Rembrandt and Vermeer, your own studies and also knowledge base of the artists of the Netherlands. Tell us what Rembrandt means to you.
Rembrandt is one of the first painters I was exposed to as a child, because I grew up in the Netherlands and we lived near the Rijksmuseum when I was from the age of 7. And so my mother would sort of drop me in that museum from time to time when she needed to do something with my grandmother. And I was 10, 11 years old wandering through this castle of pictures. And then you see the Night Watch, and especially you see paintings I remembered even better that seemed to plumb the depths of what it means to be a human being. I wouldn't have been able to say it that way when I was a little girl, but I was always stunned that you would look at a portrait like the Syndics, this group of men who seem to be interrupted by you as you stand before them, and they seem to want to say something to you. Or I would look at the painting known as The Jewish Bride, probably an Old Testament scene, and the profound union of these two people who seem to love each other and care for each other, with the hands and the eyes that brought together in a very special way. And so I think Rembrandt is the first artist who is modern in that way, I later learned. In the 17th century, he gives you this extremely strong illusion, using paint in a very innovative way, building up these complex layers where something from within the person seems to shine out through the face. And sometimes it's sadness, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's tenderness, love, amazement at some biblical miracle or something like that. And so you feel with Rembrandt that you are in front of some kind of psychologist of paint. And yet it is, of course, an illusion. And I don't mean to say that Rembrandt was necessarily a wonderful human being. We don't really know that. In fact, we know that he could be a little bit ornery and wasn't always nice even to the women in his life. We know these things. But the art that remains is a gift to all humanity. And he got to it in part by being the first artist consistently to represent himself, to paint, draw, and make etchings of his face. And so you see him trying out from a very young age. His very earliest works have him in it all the way through life. You can show his biography every year of his painting and drawing life. And I think he is the first artist to do that at such scale. And really no one did it again, I think, before, maybe Picasso or someone like that.
You also speak about and write about the idea of light and shadows. And I wanted to hear more about your own thinking about this, and of course the Enlightenment and how to be enlightened, but also that the shadows exist.
Enlightenment is these days sort of a little bit of a bad word in the academy, because of course the 18th century Enlightenment, which brought such a learning through print media and teaching and Rousseau's philosophy and so forth, Voltaire's philosophy, it brought it into the lives of many people, but at the same time it's associated with the knowledge conquest of the West, visited by empires on societies that really weren't waiting for that, to be honest, and that were often not treated well, and we have a whole post-colonial syndrome for the world because of that. And yet the idea of light I think about a lot in this country. And of course in this country that is predominantly Muslim, and where you often hear people speaking about light. One of the most beautiful phrases of the Quran is Nur ala Nur, light upon light. And I think that if you've ever seen a sunset or a sunrise, you know the power of light, and most people almost all have in their lives. And light coming and that sort of sense of well-being, that a new day has arrived in all its possibility. That's what I think about when I think about enlightenment. And I do think that it is the job of knowledge institutions of shining a bright light on things. And that can be a bright light on what is good in the world. I think we often forget that universities don't only prepare students to deal with problems and tackle them, although we do that. We also shine a bright light on human creativity and all these amazing inventions from all over the world and all cultures over time. And museums, by extension, can do the same thing. They shine a bright light, in the case of art museums, on human creativity through time and in all its diversity. And of course you have science museums and natural history museums, which we're also building here, not the Guggenheim, but the society is. I think there's a real value on that. But shining a bright light also does mean shining a bright light into the shadows and helping things come out of the shadow, whether they're beautiful and forgotten and neglected, or whether they are not so great and people need to know about them and do better about them. For example, coming up with cures for diseases or lifting people out of poverty in some way or another. So I think light can be a powerful metaphor for what knowledge institutions and cultural institutions need to do.
What do you do in your downtime? Do you have downtime?
I think it's critical to create downtime and a space to center what you're thinking about. And I have many, many interests, and I try to just constrain them a little bit. But the things I truly love to do in my time is spending time with my husband and my children on the things that we do together, walking, making meals together, sharing that time, watching TV shows and movies. I usually fall asleep, but it's okay, it's a family meme. But the thing I really do a lot on my own and with people around me is garden. Both design garden spaces. I've had the blessing of being able to do that twice in this country, and may they survive. One of the first of those gardens in the downtown campus still exists and is still flourishing, so I'm hopeful. But especially at home, I like to work with plants and all the kinds of garden hardscape that you need around it to create beautiful spaces that people can enjoy, and for people to, including myself, to follow the turning of the seasons, the turning of the day. So much happens and changes in gardens. Gardens are an art form, but it is the most ephemeral and changeable of art forms. So I truly enjoy that especially.
Tell us a little bit more about your children.
So we are blessed, Charlie and I are blessed with 4 children in the ages of 31 down to 20, it's hard to keep track of them sometimes, down to 26, just turned 26, or 25. And they are 2 girls and 2 boys, and they are wonderfully independent in what they're interested in. We've always encouraged that. Of course, what then happens is that most of them work in the arts and humanities. I don't think they'll get wealthy from it, but I hope they'll have rich lives, and they will also help many people. For example, my oldest daughter was trained as an actor at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, and later on became a psychotherapist. So she's a drama therapist who uses art to help all sorts of people with their challenges, and I think that is beautiful. I can go on and on about them, but they are all 4 of them well on their path in life. 2 of them are getting married this year, so we're excited about that. But also the 4 of them are really together in their difference and their family ties. They're close, which is very nice.
And moving to New York will bring you closer to them?
3 of our children live in New York.
Oh, wonderful.
And one of those is getting married, so we'll have 4 of them there. Every Sunday night, Sunday dinner, as they wish. So we look forward to that, and then we'll find a way to get that couple from London to come.
I'm sure you will. My final question. If I had to write a 1-line bio about you, but not using your work title, what would I write?
Mariët Westermann works to help make every community she enters a better place.
It's beautiful. And you do.
I hope so. I mean, it's a hope. It's a hope.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.